We live out there? Yeah? TAP 2016, let's hear it. I'm thrilled to be back this year to moderate the investing panel. I was with you guys last year, and we had a slightly less attractive panel of investors this year. So super excited to have an all-female panel. I want to give props to Button for really having a call to action to have more female panelists this year. I think we have over 50% of the panelists at the TAPs this year are female, so I think that's great. Just wanted to call that out. We are here to talk about money, something I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are hoping to get more of. So I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists, and we're going to kick it off with some rapid-fire questions. So with me, I have farthest is Angela Dalton. She's a managing director at Guggenheim. Then we have Nimi Katragati. She is a principal at Box Group. Heidi Roizen is an operating partner at DFJ. And then Suzanne Greenfield is director of corporate development at Priceline Group. Thanks so much for being here, guys. So to get started, I'm just going to ask some quick rapid-fire questions and want a one-word response. So to start, in 5 years, will the app economy be growing, stagnating, or basically dead?
Growing, but it will look different.
Okay.
Growing, definitely.
Growing.
I agree, growing, but in a completely different form. The way we deal with apps and interact with apps will be completely different.
Okay. And if you could only invest in bot-driven startups or on-demand startups for the next 5 years, which would you choose? We'll start this down here.
Bot.
Is there going to be a difference?
Okay, I'll take that.
On demand.
Bot-driven.
Bot-driven? Okay. And is the biggest reason why there are so few women in venture capital because there is a pipeline problem, there's unconscious bias in the industry, or there's just conscious bias throughout the industry?
I think there's all three, but I think the biggest is unconscious bias.
I think there's all three, but I think the biggest is pipeline.
Unconscious bias to me.
I'd say unconscious as well.
Okay. So each of you are committed to investing in mobile startups that are at very different stages. I want you briefly to kind of talk to us about what it is that you guys do and what stage you guys are looking to invest in, and then what you think is the biggest challenge facing the startups that you guys are looking to invest in right now. So Heidi, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, DFJ is a firm that's been around for a long time, 30 years. We like to think of ourselves as a company that thinks big, and we do things like SpaceX, Tesla, Box, Skype, Baidu, some of the older ones that we've done. So we really are a firm that's looking for super transformational things, and therefore we are probably not going to, and we're also not super early stage. We're really the sort of the $7 to $10 million check is the first check we write. So we're looking for something a little bit different. I think with venture firms of the type of DFJ, you're really looking for firms that are going to have multi-hundred million, if not billion-dollar outcomes. So you're generally trying to solve what I'd call really big problems. I think the biggest challenge you have in trying to solve really big problems is, first of all, if you identify it as a big problem and lots of other people identify it as a big problem, there's a lot of competition. And the other interest, there's number one. Number two is some big problems don't look like big problems. They start as small problems. And number three is some things that we didn't even know were problems, like how to rent space in your house when you're not using it. Nobody knew that was even a problem. And so some of the biggest things I wish we had invested in today were certainly not things we could have identified as big problems that needed solving. So that's the challenge.
Okay. Suzanne, you want to follow up?
Yeah. So Heidi's comment or just?
Yeah, for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also to your comment, we definitely missed, or we didn't think Airbnb would be as big of a trend. That's something that we've kind of came up the learning curve for. Mm-hmm. So I work for Priceline Group. We're a 70 billion market cap company. We own a bunch of different e-commerce companies, mostly in the travel or hospitality sector, like Booking or Priceline, Kayak, OpenTable. And what I spend my time doing is venture investing, both in our sector, so travel and hospitality, but also being the third largest e-commerce company in the world after Alibaba and Amazon. We're also investing in just all emerging technologies that affect e-commerce. I'd say we usually start investing at the Series A stage, and then we have a tremendous amount of capital, something like 12 billion on our balance sheet right now, so we can really kind of go up to much higher valuations or invest larger amounts depending on where a company is. I agree, it's really hard to figure out what the next best emerging, or invest in those trends. We're trying to stay relevant as an e-commerce company and not get disintermediated. So we're always trying to invest in what's innovative, what's new. So we spent a lot of time looking at things like chatbots and AI and virtual reality and how are those trends going to affect e-commerce and how are those trends going to affect us and how when new companies emerge like an Airbnb, like can we adjust or innovate to make sure that we don't get completely disintermediated?
I work at a seed stage fund here in New York called Box Group. We're a small team of 5, and our goal is really to invest in entrepreneurs at the earliest stages. And so, of all the panels here, we're probably sort of the closest to early founders. We're generalists, so we look across sectors. On the consumer side, whether it's direct-to-consumer brands like Warby Parker, Harry's, e-commerce, we invest in fintech, healthcare. And so it's, the struggle of being a generalist, it's all about sort of investing in great people and great founders. So I think if anything, like our job is actually so much psychological and like a lot of art, which is challenging. But for sure we see mobile as a horizontal. It's no longer a vertical. It's part of every company that we see. There's no such thing as sort of being mobile first or mobile only anymore. It's just something that everyone is thinking about from the get-go. And so, I think the challenge for us is just sort of identifying the promise of something amazing, identifying, who is going to be that next Airbnb founder who like sort of has that sparkle in their eye and that grit, without always seeing the traction there already. So it's a big leap of faith, but we're excited to make it.
Yeah, so I just say I'm at Guggenheim Partners. I'm in the securities business within there. So I'm kind of a liaison between the capital markets group and the investment bank. And so we will take companies public in the capital markets group. As Chris Moore alluded to earlier in the earlier panel, the capital markets transactions slowed pretty dramatically. In 2015 was a big year for us. There were 33 IPOs in tech. So far this year, as of last I looked, just a few days ago, 16. So they're down a lot. So I've shifted my focus a little bit to the private space. So we also raise private capital. We just completed a deal for Defy Media, and that has been rocky as well. Given he alluded to the situation in Q4 with the private space. Kind of pulling back a little bit because of valuations getting written down. But I think that both are picking up pretty dramatically. And the good news, I think, is that in 2016 at least, in terms of the deals that have gotten done in the public space, all but one are up from the offer price versus about half in 2015 that are down from the offer price.
Yeah, let's pick up on what Angela was talking about there. Where are we in terms of the investment cycle, and how is it affecting the rest of your strategies, particularly with an eye to mobile? Heidi, you're
I can
shaking
tell
your
you
head.
what we're telling all we're telling all our companies is, if you can raise money now, raise it now, because it might be a couple of years. I think we just know every time we go through an election cycle, and I think there are some indicators that whichever candidate wins, there will be some negative things as it in terms of venture and startups and all that. There's a lot of positive rhetoric, but sort of if you just start
anything in particular that would be the most negative outcome of the election?
You really want me to go there?
Might as well.
Well, one of the things that interesting venture capitalists talk about is almost like whoever wins the election, there's going to be the whole debate about carried interest, which is going to fundamentally change the economics of being in venture capital. But I sort of feel like I think pretty much everyone's still going to do it.
There was some chatter on Twitter. It's like, what was the VC who said if the carried interest rate went to 0, he was going to quit?
Let's see if that really happens. I saw that, but I don't really believe that's going to happen. But I do think history has shown us that post-election cycles, when you put a new administration in, it always increases uncertainty, and uncertainty is usually bad for public markets, right? And so generally speaking, and public markets are sort of in a way they sort of lag early stage. I almost feel like we sort of are sort of, hey, we're early stage. It doesn't matter what happens in the public markets. But ultimately, everything has to wash out through the public market, either because you yourself are going public or you're being acquired by entities who are almost always public and using their capital to make the acquisition. So long story short, we think it's kind of bumpy seas ahead. The climate overall is good for startups, but the weather might be bad for a while. And so just get your umbrella out, and we like money umbrellas.
Yeah.
So.
Either of you have anything to add? Anyone?
I think for us, at the really early stage, it's a little bit different. I think that we're thinking about just like backing the best people, and we hope that our companies make it to the public markets. And to us, like that is an amazing outcome. I think that the trend that we're seeing in mobile that we're thinking about a lot is we're in a unique time where mobile is really maturing and consolidating. So the top 7 mobile apps by unique visitors are owned by Facebook or Google, and so it's a really daunting environment for founders. And I think it makes customer acquisition and mobile app discovery be at the forefront of every conversation. And so I think every founder is sort of banging their head against the wall thinking about customer acquisition, just given sort of the mobile environment that we're in right now.
And where do you see, we've talked, I mean, I've sat in on some of the panels today, we've talked a lot about the challenges, but where are the opportunities? Yes, the consolidation is happening. Yes, there are a lot of mobile apps, but where are there still areas where startups could potentially innovate on mobile? Want to take that?
I mean, I think when sometimes people are like, "What's the next industry?" And I don't think it's necessarily an industry. I think it's always innovating on the newest technologies and taking advantage of it. So, like the popularity of Pokemon Go, that was because they were able to take augmented reality, which is an emerging technology, which is still developing, and really utilize it. And go back to other startups that really popped, like Instagram and Foursquare. It was right around the same time when location services and having like cameras on your phone was getting popular. So I think it's about making use of the like experiences that are very specific to mobile and can't be felt on the desktop, and making use of the emerging technologies that are coming both on mobile and outside of mobile, and putting them into that experience and giving consumers a completely different outlook or experiencing things in a whole new way.
I think this is one of the challenges that we all have. And the great thing about being investors is we don't actually have to come up with the brilliant ideas for what the next big thing is. We just have to know them when we see them, and get those people to want to talk to us. But I do think that the general idea for me at mobile is, first of all, there are going to be billions of people coming online with that as their only device, right? That's a huge opportunity, and a huge opportunity to kind of change the world and do some pretty amazing things. Second of all, mobile device is the biggest data collector we've ever had. And when you think about the massive amounts of data that if you only had it and could process it and know what to do with it through machine learning or whatever else, you could create some amazing insights, actions, other things. So I sort of think of us as being at this early, primordial soup of this incredible collection of amazing technologies that you can put together to do amazing things. But I don't know what those amazing things are. But I just know there's going to be some amazing things. You guys know what those amazing things are, right?
I was hoping these guys were going to dig into the details, because I was just going to say mobile, generally speaking. I mean, if you look at, I loved the Mary Meeker Internet Report, the one slide where she showed that, time spent is a lead indicator, and advertising dollars have caught up to time spent in basically every bucket except mobile. And in that bucket, it's about half. She calculated another $22 billion of opportunity in mobile relative to the other categories.
So why are we hearing things like the app economy is dead and everything's switching to conversational commerce and things like that? I mean, is that true, or is there really no opportunity anymore for app producers, or kind of when you guys are looking at the space and thinking about startups, when they come out with an app and they say that they're going to get customers through another mobile app, how do you guys evaluate that, and how do you ensure that they're actually going to be able to come through with that promise?
Well, I think with the chat and commerce, I think that's definitely a trend. So we've done a lot of investing in China, and for those people who are aware of the Chinese market, Tencent, one of the biggest players there, has an app called WeChat, and it's incredibly popular. And WeChat's different than the chat apps that we have, like Facebook Messenger or Snapchat. People don't only chat on WeChat, they pay for things on WeChat, they do their shopping on WeChat. So when one of our businesses, Booking.com, expanded into China, they actually built an app, but for the WeChat platform. So the WeChat platform has actually become almost the iOS platform that apps are getting built on. So if you look at what kind of Facebook's trying to do with their WhatsApp acquisition, and even with the chatbots that they're releasing now and all the AI they're putting into it, they're kind of trying to become that WeChat-like product. But that doesn't mean you can still, so that just means if something like that wins out, which I don't know that it does, if we follow the same trends as China, it just means then you're developing apps instead of for an iOS or an Android platform for the Facebook platform. But it's still an app, it's just an app for a different platform.
An app with a different face.
Yeah.
And I think think that's the thing is, what does it really mean to be an app, right? I mean, somebody once said, I wish I could remember who said that. He said, you're either paying for the product or you are the product, right? And in terms of, that's why I think mobile has really fallen behind in terms of that. You are the product in terms of an ad-based economy for a product. But, when you really think about it, is Uber an app? Well, I mean, you're not paying to use the app, right? If I think about like the number of apps installed on my phone, how many of them did I pay an app store for that app? The vast majority no, but I'm paying something, right? I'm paying something somewhere else for that app is just a piece of the whole business model. And so I think it's really important for us to look at the whole business model, not just the part that happens to reside on the phone.
Yeah. And I think in some ways the venture community a little bit tries to always run and chase the next platform. So I think a little bit you have this meme that mobile is dead. And like in reality, I very much believe that we're in sort of the very early innings of mobile and there's so much more that we can do with it. But I think part of that is a little bit of sort of dollars trying to chase and create a new platform when we actually could really be fully riding this out more.
We started the panel talking a little bit about the shortage of women in venture capital. Since I have you guys on stage, I do want to hit on that topic. What's the problem? Like, what can we do to get more women? I'm so exhausted by asking this question, but I typically, I ask men this question so often, so it would be great to hear from the few and the proud. How can we get more women into finance, into the industry? Where do you see the holes?
I'm personally here to hear what she has to say. There was a Harvard Business School study written about her, so.
All right, Heidi,
I'm changing my name to Howard and entering the field as a man. No, I mean, look, I said early on, I think there is a pipeline problem. I think the problem is you have to get people, where does the venture capitalist sent from Central Casting has an undergraduate technical degree, then worked at Google for a while as an engineer, and then went and got their MBA at one of 5 schools. And then, so first of all, there's a mold, and if you don't fit the mold, you don't necessarily get the interview. Well, so we should break that mold a little bit, and I think we are breaking that mold. We are seeing more people come through that mold where I just described your resume, but you happen to be female or of a different ethnicity than the usual. I think we're getting there. I think that, I also teach at Stanford in the engineering school, and Persis Drell, the dean of the engineering school, just put out something about subtle gender bias and how we all need to be careful about, even if we're putting a case study out there or giving an example, that we should mix up the kind of names we use. We shouldn't say things like a coder should make sure that he's documenting his code. There's so many subtle things that lead to the impression for people and for women, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to be here, or I guess people like me aren't supposed to be here. So I think, number one, we all have to be aware of that, and we all have to try to orient towards it. I mean, Warren Buffett, who I know you've interviewed many times, Warren has said this amazing thing about, why would you not include women? You're missing out on half of the brain trust. In fact, more than half the brain trust. Warren says that. Not me saying it. Warren says that. So I do think that I think this is one of those things where you can do a good thing, but it's also really good business to do it. I mean, I think diversity has power. I mean, biology teaches us that diversity has power, and I think that like at DFJ, we made a concerted effort to reach out. We just hired some new people, and we made sure that we were including women candidates by going out into our network. And in fact, we ended up hiring a woman who didn't apply at DFJ, right? Who is super awesome. But we actually went out to professors at top business schools and said, who are the best people in your class? And lo and behold, here was one that didn't happen to apply for DFJ, and we ended up hiring her. So I think you have to sort of actually make an effort to go make these things happen. It doesn't mean there aren't super quality people out there. It just means that we still have inefficient networks and processes for finding those people. So,
Nimi, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of having gone through this experience myself, like being, that person who's coming from an MBA program, I think 2 things. So one, I think that there is unconscious bias in the industry, and to me it manifests itself in homophily. So just sort of this notion that you tend to get along and be more comfortable with people who are similar to you. And so I think that is sort of what perpetuates it. And I think that's like a really pervasive thing that's important for us to all try to figure out. And I think that one great way to solve that is for, people who are in our seats, like there is sort of homophily working in the other direction too, where, when we see those candidates and they're female and we totally get how we resonate with each other, that's one way to sort of help the problem. But I think it's a really tough thing to solve. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah. And as we were talking about before the panel, a venture capitalist wrote a column in the Wall Street Journal yesterday where he was encouraging women in tech in order to get over all this unconscious bias and homophily to have online personas that hide their gender. So to do things like have their first initial instead of their first name, or not have a profile photo on LinkedIn and Twitter. Who here read that article? Yeah. So bad.
Thank you.
So talk to us about, why that was bad advice, or if you don't think it was bad advice, what you thought of the article in general. Angela, you want to start?
Yeah, it made me really mad. I mean, it's wrong on a lot of levels. I think that it presupposes that only performance and only unemotional, kind of units of production are why people are successful. And it just also perpetuates a trap, I think, that a lot of women fall into, which is, I'm just going to keep my head down, I'm just going to keep producing, I'm just going to keep doing a good job, and I'll get noticed. And in fact, it's a combination of things. It's obviously, competence, but it's also relationships. It's also warmth, and that's why a lot of, and it works for men, and I think it also works for women. But to say that you should take out that side of the equation, imagine if everybody did that. It would be even a bigger gender gap,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
I just think it's, I do think that this, I love Mike Ciccone for doing this, by the way, and getting all these women in response to your, in response to last year, because I think it's timely with Sheryl Sandberg's, article this week, and there is a lot of unconscious bias, and she even concluded from women as well, where it was something like, if a woman even engages in a negotiation, she's 67% more likely than a man to be viewed as aggressive or bossy. I mean, that's unconscious bias. We have to just be aware of that.
So can I stand up for the author of the article, who I
Yeah.
know is really well
Please,
known?
you're going to be the only person on the
I-
internet to
I'm
stand
the
up for
only
him,
person
so
that's
let's
gonna-
hear it.
I mean, I'll say this. I read it too, and we were all talking about it on email last night. I'm like, this is sad, but it's also true. And I think particularly, I'm a little older than everyone else on the panel here, and I remember being out there in technology where I'd go to a conference like this, there'd be 100 people in the room. I would be the only woman, right? So, I've been in those environments before. I see how people have bias, and the reality is, yes, we need to change things, but we also need to recognize the reality for what it is. So, for example, I have kids in their 20s. They were both born female. I gave them both names that could be gender neutral, like Nick and Marley, and names they could choose, so that when they submitted their resume, someone might not know they were female. I actually did that 23 years ago when I had my first child. So. I do think there is some reality to this. I do think this idea of, and I think that the statistic that was mentioned in the article about having the orchestras have
blind
the
orchestra,
candidates,
yeah.
the blind auditions. I mean, the truth is it changed the outcome. And so I don't think that the author was sort of saying, look, there's an element of reality here. And I love that the world is changing, but I also think that there is an element of reality that you can't ignore, that the world is a certain
But come
way.
on, the article was saying he wasn't saying this is a problem and, companies and people need to address it. He was saying that, yes, there's a problem, and women, you need to change yourselves to address it. I mean, what do either of you think?
Well, I think, sorry, I'll get on a soapbox about this. So I do teach this class at Stanford, and I had another venture capitalist female, a real trailblazer, even older than I am, who came and spoke to the students, and she said things like, don't wear a super low cut dress to work, and don't, if your boss takes you out for drinks at night and starts telling you about how his wife doesn't understand him, well, maybe you should just not go out for drinks with your boss, and don't put yourself in these situations. And one of my students was super, super mad afterwards and came to me and said, I think you're blaming the victim. I think this was really bad advice. I was offended. I mean, this person left the room crying listening to this other person speak. And I said, well, look, when I go to sleep, when I leave my house, I lock my doors. Because if somebody's going to come walking down my street and they're going to try to break into houses, I'd rather they pick someone other than mine. I'm not going to make it easy for them. And I'm sorry to say this, but some of the comments that this other VC was saying, just don't be that person who is the easiest target. And that's a subtly different message, but somebody got really offended for that. And my own comment was, well, I think that's just good advice. If you don't want to take it, you don't have to take it. But at the end of the day, we also do live in this real world where these sorts of things happen. So, I mean, I get, I don't know, not everyone agrees with me.
And it was pointed out that women have similar biases sometimes toward other women.
Sure.
So,
I just think there's a distinction though between making yourself, totally understand your point of like locking your doors to sort of make yourself be less vulnerable. I understand that, but I think there's a pretty big difference towards like hiding your identity entirely, which I think that was like my big issue with that article on why that advice is so asinine. Like, why should you hide your identity because the person on the other side of the table is backwards? To me, that's actually just making the problem worse in a way.
And ultimately, it's our identity that gives us strength in the roles we have, right? I mean, I think if each one of us would say, hey, there's something about me that I'm a woman that actually makes me more powerful in certain positions, right?
It gives different perspective, diversity.
Yeah, say more about that.
I mean,
Suzanne.
go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's been shown, and our company is really pushing forward and trying to. Every time we hire or elect a new board member to our board, we always have to look at women board members. We're doing a lot of women's initiatives, creating a lot of networking groups within our companies, finding ways to promote women and make sure every time we're interviewing people, women are considered. And it's because of this unconscious bias. So we know that diversity, companies who have diverse managements, who have diverse investors, actually do better. Like it's just statistically been shown. But there is this unconscious bias, and it's natural, like you said. People end up wanting to promote or be with people who are similar to them. So if you have, in case of a lot of white males in our company, then they're often going to promote white males. So you have to do something to fight that unconscious bias. Sure. So I think in the end, when you have that diversity, it makes a big difference for your investments, for the success of your company.
Great. We're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you guys so much for a great discussion. Thank you to TAP.
Thank you.
Hope to continue the conversation outside.